Hey guys, welcome you all to another video, and today we are going to start with the restoration poetry, or you can say that neoclassicism, and we are going to look at the three important poetical genres which were published during the restoration period. We are going to see epic, mock epic, and as well as the satire. So, you know that the Restoration was an age of poetry. Not only was poetry the most popular form of literature, but it was also the most significant form of literature, as poems affected political events and immediately reflected the times. It was, to its own people, an age dominated only by the king and not by any single genius. Throughout the period, the relic, aerial, historical, and epic poem was being developed. Let's start with the epic. So, you know that what is the definition of epic? So, epic is a long, dramatic narrative poem, and it has an elevated style, and it is generally about the legendary hero, and the story goes around him. So, even without the introduction of neoclassical criticism, English poets were aware that they had no natural epic. Edmund Spenser's fairy tale was well known, but England, unlike France with the Song of Roland or Spain with the Cantor de Cid, almost all, Italy, the Aeneid, had no epic poem of national origin. Several poets attempted to supply this void. Sir William Davenant was the first Restoration poet to attempt an epic. His unfinished Gondibert was of epic length, and it was admired by Hobbes. However, it also used the ballad form, and other poets, as well as critics, were very quick to condemn this rhyme scheme as unflattering and unheroic. The preface to Gondibert show the struggle for a formal epic structure, as well as how the early restoration saw themselves in relation to classical literature. Although today he is studied separately from the Restoration period, John Milton's Paradise Lost was published during that time. Milton, no less than Davenant, wished to write the English epic and chose blank verse as his form. Milton rejected the cause of English expressionism. His Paradise Lost seeks to tell the story of all mankind, and his pride is in Christianity rather than Englishness. Significantly, Milton began with an attempt at writing an epic of King Arthur, for that was the matter of English national bounding. While Milton rejected that subject, in the end, others made the attempt. Richard Blackmore wrote both A Prince Arthur and King Arthur. Both attempts were wrong, soporific, and failed both critically and popularly. Indeed, the poetry was so slow that the author became known as Never Ending Blackmore. The Restoration period ended without an English epic. Beowulf may now be called the English epic, but the work was unknown to the Restoration authors, and Old English was incomprehensible to them. So, therefore, uh, John Milton's epic, if you uh, accept John Milton, then there is no English epic in the Restoration period. If you exclude John Milton's Paradise Lost and Paradise Regained. So let's start with the other kind of poetry first, and then we are going to move to the mock epic and satire. So all this mock epic and satire we are going to cover in this segment. So let's start begin with the relic poetry, so in which the poet speaks of his or her own feeling in the first person and expresses a mood, was not especially common in the restoration period. So relic poetry was not common in restoration period. Poets express their points of view in other forms, usually public or formally disguised poetic forms such as odes, pastoral poetry, and aerial verse. One of the characteristics of the period is the devaluation of individual sentiment and psychology in favor of public utterance and philosophy. The sorts of relic poetry found later in the churchyard poets would in the Restoration only exist as a pastoral. Finally, the Restoration period had a preferred rhyme scheme. Rhyming couplets in iambic pentameter was by far the most popular structure for poetry of all types. Neoclassicism meant that poets attempted adaptation of classical meters, but the rhyming couplet in iambic pentameter held a near monopoly. According to Dryden, in his preface to The Conquest of Guerenda, the rhyming couplet in iambic pentameter has the right restraint and dignity for a lofty subject, and its rhyme allowed for a complete, coherent statement to be made. Dryden was struggling with the issue of which later critics in the Augustan period would call decorum, the fitness of form to subject. It is the same struggle that Devon faced in his Gondibert. Dryden's solution was a closed couplet in iambic pentameter that would have a minimum of enjambment. The form was called the heroic couplet because it was suitable for heroic subject. Okay, so after 1672, Samuel Butler has written Hadribaz. It was actually the parody heroic verse, or we can say the mock epic. The first mock epic was written by Samuel Butler, and it was published in 1672, and the title was Hadribaz. Okay, and it was the first mock epic. Jonathan Swift would use the Hydrabastic form almost exclusively for his poetry. Although Dryden's reputation is greater today, contemporaries saw the 1617 and 1618 at the age of court of poets in general, and Edmund Waller was the praise as any. Dryden, Rochester, Buckingham, and Doris dominated verse, and all were attached to the code of Charles. Afra, Ben, Matthew Ferrer, and Robert Gould, by contrast, were outsiders who were profoundly royalist. The court poets follow no one particular style, except that they all show sexual awareness, a willingness to satirize, and dependence upon wit to dominate their opponent. Each of these poets wrote for the stage as well as the page. Of these, Ben, Dryden, Rochester, and Gould deserve some separate mention. Dryden was prolific and he was often accused of plagiarism, but both before and after his lectureship, he wrote public odes. He attempted the Jacobin pastoral along the lines of Walter Raleigh and Philip Sidney, but his greatest successes and fame came from his attempt to apologize for the restored code as the established church. He has written satires like Absalom and Ashitobal. These are the satiric poem, and Religio Laici was also the satiric poet. Both served the king directly by making controversial royal action seem reasonable. He also pioneered the epic, mock epic. Although Samuel Butler had invented the mock heroic poem in English, okay, the mock epic means heroic poem in Restoration period. So therefore, it is. I'm just telling you the mock heroic poem. So, although Samuel Butler, as I have told you, he has invented the mock heroic poem through Hazribaz, okay, but Dryden's Mac Flacnon set up the satirical parody. It was the satirical mock epic, we can say, Mac Flacnon, or satirical poem or satirical mock epic. Dryden was himself not of a noble blood, and he was never awarded the honors that he had been promised by the king. But he did as much as any peer to serve Charles II. Even when James II came to the throne and Roman Catholicism was on the rise, Dryden attempted to serve the court, and his The Hind and the Panther, this was another mock epic poem or satirical poem, praised the Roman Church above all others. After that point, Dryden suffered for his conversion, and he was the victim of many satires. Another poet was Buckingham, wrote some court poetry, but he, like Dorest, was a patron of poetry more than a poet. Rochester, meanwhile, was a prolix and outrageous poet. Rochester poetry is almost always sexually frank and is frequently political. In as much as the Restoration came after the Interregnum, the very sexual explanation of Rochester's verse was a political statement. So actually, he has a mock epic poem like a topographical poem, like a ramble in St. James Park. Okay, so these were the poet he has written. Afra Ben, she modeled the Rack Walmer in her play The Role of the Rochester, and while she was best known publicly for her drama, which was published in 1617, only Dryden's play were stages more often than hers, and Ben wrote a great deal of poetry that would be basis of her later reputation. Edward B.C. was another poet, and he written Art of English Poetry in 1702. While her poetry was occasionally sexual frank, it was never a graphic or intentional ruled or retiring as Rochester. Rather, her poetry was like the court's ethos, playful and honest about sexual desire. One of the most remarkable aspects of Ben's success in court poetry, however, is that Ben was herself a commoner. She had no more relation to peer than Dryden, and possibly quit her Beatles. As a woman, a commoner and Kentish, she is remarkable for her success in moving in the same circle as the king himself. As Janet Todd and others have shown, she was likely a spy for the royalist side during the interregnum. She was certainly a spy for Charles II in the Second Anglo-Dutch War, but found her services unrewarded and turned to writing support herself. Her ability to write poetry that stand among the best of the age gives some lie to the notion that the Restoration was an age of female illiteracy and verse composed and read only by peers. So another poet was Robert Gould, and he was born of a common family and orphaned at the age of 13. He had no schooling at all and worked as a domestic servant, first as a footman and then probably in the poultry. So he started writing first in Latin, and during 1618 to 1619, his poetry was very popular. So he attempted to write odes for poetry, money, but his great success came with Love Given or a Satire upon a Woman in 1692. So it was a partial adaptation of satire by Juvenal, but with an immense amount of explicit invective against women. The misogyny in his poem is some of the harshest and most visceral in English poetry. The poem sold out our edition. So Gould also wrote satire on the playhouse. Okay, and Virgin Orals. These are the things he has written. So, guys, that was the restoration poetry, and in this lecture, I have tried to cover the three important poetic genres like epic, mock epic, and satire. I hope that you understood it. So we are going to move on in next lecture to the restoration drama. So until then, start reading. I'm going to post our notes on our Google Classroom and just download it and start studying. So thank you for watching and see you in the next video.